Good afternoon and welcome to the fifth installment of SHFM's Conversations That Matter series, presented by the SHFM Diversity and Inclusion Council. Today, our conversation will focus on eye-opening strategies of inclusive recruiting. My name is Rob Gebhardt, and I am the SHFM President-elect. During the day, I am the Vice President of Experience Services, leading the Americas Operations team at JLL. Thank you so much for joining today. Before we begin, I have a few quick reminders that you may have heard from previous sessions. First, please ask your questions throughout the session in the Q&A window on your toolbar. We will have some time at the end of the discussion today to respond to some of those questions, so be sure to include them throughout. We'd also love to know where you're joining us from, so drop in a friendly hello in the chat box and let us know your location. Today's session is being recorded, so it will be played on demand. The recording will be available on the SHFM website as well as our YouTube channel later this week. Finally, there will be a 60-second evaluation for the session that will appear in the browser when the event ends or when you exit the session. Be sure to share your thoughts with us as we continue to plan for future events. Today's SHFM educational program was developed by your peers. I want to say a thank you to the Diversity and Inclusion Council for their tremendous work on this session. A quick background on this council. The council was developed to foster an environment that embraces diversity and inclusion at all levels in the market and the communities we serve. With a goal to increase the diversity of membership, to champion employment opportunities, highlight and encourage procurement opportunities for minority-owned businesses within the food service industry. The overarching objective is to bring awareness to diversity issues surrounding the workplace hospitality segment. The council looks to assist, support, encourage our members to better understand the importance of diversity to our business and what it means to our society and the industry as a whole. I am especially excited about today's conversation as a hiring manager, and I'm very interested to hear what our speakers have to say. We have a phenomenal speaker panel and a fantastic topic to get started on. I'd like to introduce today's session moderator, who hardly needs an introduction. Victoria Vega, Senior Vice President of Operations, Marketing and Innovation at Untitled Corporation, as well as the SHFM past president. Victoria brings over 30 years of contract food service experience to her role at Untitled on the executive leadership team. She oversees brand strategy, consumer experience, nutrition, wellness, and sustainability, as well as operational excellence and quality assurance. She is well known as an innovative operations leader, a dynamic speaker, and is passionate about delivering unique dining experiences throughout the guest engagement segment. Victoria is the 2020 recipient of the IFMA Silver Plate for food service and is a past president of the society. She launched the SHFM Diversity Council and is currently the co-chair of this critical initiative. Without any further ado, Victoria, over to you.
Thanks, Rob. I'm excited to jump in today's diversity and inclusion conversation to discuss how we develop and strengthen strategies to recruit a broad array of talent that reflects the perspectives and experiences of the composition of the workplace hospitality industry that we serve. In advance of this critical conversation, I'd like to recognize the SHFM Diversity and Inclusion Council led by Sumi De Benedettis. Aligned to the strategic plan, our council pillars focus on people, knowledge, and community. Your impassioned peers on the knowledge team who created today's session include Jessica Tanton, Danielle Pedersen, Benjamin Anderson, Matthew Smythe, Travis Ho, and Z. Shami. As RG3 shared, this is our fifth installment of the Conversations That Matter series. Over the course of these webinars, we have spoken to the what, socialized many best practices, highlighted the whys, but we haven't taken a deep dive on how you can make an impact on diversity and inclusion. So let's talk about it. Research shows that racial and gender diverse workforces outperform companies with less diverse leadership teams. Yet through billions of dollars and decades of effort, many companies still fail to achieve their diversity and equity goals. Despite increasing diversity, companies are still struggling to create cultures of belonging that serve to retain and advance diverse talent. As we uncover the rewards and obstacles to inclusive recruiting, let's meet our dynamic speakers. Please join me in welcoming Kayla Blanks. Kayla's core belief is to make an impact by empowering people to thrive. She brings distinction to her role as a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategist at Wawa, where she aligns her personal philosophy to corporate objectives in her daily actions. Kayla ensures people feel seen and heard, included and involved, while connected and supported through her work on the diversity, equity, and inclusion team by enlightening both leadership and bringing forward the diverse voices that have made Wawa an East Coast travel stop for millions. She passionately cares about people and is grateful to be able to channel that passion through her work. Kayla holds a master's degree in organizational leadership with a focus in human resources from Northeastern University and is an alum from Temple University with a bachelor's degree in psychology. I'm sure this Philly resident has some fun facts to share about herself. Hello, Kayla.
Hey, Victoria, thank you so much for that awesome introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Kayla, as Victoria mentioned. I use the pronouns she and they, and look forward to having this discussion. A good fun fact, yay, Temple Owls. Hey, Amy from the fellow Temple alumni. Got to call y'all out and my fellow crew here, right? A good fun fact about me is that I am actually a sci-fi space nerd. In full transparency, some of y'all may know this already about me. It's a lot of Star Trek and Star Wars, so it's really been cool to break into this DE&I space. And as we've kind of added some words in our nomenclature here, I started to call myself a Jedi Knight, Justice, Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion Knight. So if you're out there, my other fellow Jedi Knights, looking forward to continuing this work and discussion today.
Well, wonderful. Thanks, Kayla. Let's head to the Bay Area now, where it's my pleasure to introduce Misty Gaither. Misty is the Director of and Global Head of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at Indeed. She is primarily focused on removing bias and barriers from systems and processes, advising hiring organizations on how to build more inclusive products while building a culture of inclusion and belonging. Misty is a natural connector and relationship builder. She leverages being the only in a room as her superpower and is mission-driven about implementing change through education and awareness about the innumerable topics surrounding diversity, inclusion, and belonging, while disrupting the systemic issues that exclude underrepresented groups. Misty is a proud alumna of Florida A&M University School of Business and Industry, where she earned her degree in business administration with a marketing concentration. And now coming to the screen to share some personal anecdotes, I can't wait for you all to meet Misty.
Thanks so much, Victoria, for that introduction. Hi, everyone. I am Misty Gaither. My pronouns are she and her. Thank you, Kayla, for reminding me to update that in the Zoom chat feature. I thought I did it, but it didn't stick. So let's see. Fun fact. So I'm here today coming to you live about 10 minutes door to door from San Francisco, but I am a sunny, California girl from Los Angeles. I think it's important for people on this panel to know that when you get my, I guess, take on DIMB, you get a little bit of homegirl mixed with a bit of a corporate persona, definitely from Long Beach, Compton. So if you follow Venus and Serena, Kendrick Lamar, that's how you can kind of understand a little bit more about my background. I think additionally, didn't know that what I do today was actually a career option. Definitely did not go to school saying I want to do diversity, inclusion, and belonging work. And it's something that I ended up seeking out after having some lived experiences and helping other people navigate. So on the more fun side of things, I am an absolute lover of brunch. I do that for sport. You can always find me checking out new restaurants. Definitely take advantage of being in close proximity to Napa. And speaking of that superpower Victoria mentioned, I tell people I'm like a maestro. I make a lot of things happen behind the scenes. It's like magic almost. And a lot of that is how I remove bias and barriers from things that are, keeping folks from finding their next opportunity. So thanks. And I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Oh, great. Thank you, ladies, for setting the tone for our conversation. You clearly both employ change to secure a more inclusive future for all of us. As we planned our time together, it really wasn't lost on our committee that there are key differentiating components in both of your titles. So let's start there. Misty, how does the word belonging define your role and your actions at Indeed?
So context for why Indeed actually refers to this work as diversity, inclusion, and belonging. In 2019 is when we really sat down and redefined it. So the person who was leading this restructured it and moved it from diversity and inclusion to adding belonging. So belonging can be considered an end state. So when you have diversity, so the perspectives, the visible, the invisible characteristics of that, and then people actually feel psychologically safe, they feel comfortable, they can trust, if they have a different opinion, that they are still valued and they will be heard. That's when you really get belonging. And so as we do the work at Indeed and as we provide guidance to companies, we want to move from having, a pretty, narrow discussion only focusing on who we're bringing into our organization. And I think belonging allows us to really identify processes and steps we need to take to keep people in our organizations and to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to really thrive and succeed in their organization.
That's great. I know we're going to get back to a few of the sentiments that you brought forward. But Kayla, let me ask you in a similar line of thought, how do you leverage being a strategist for Wawa's DEI initiatives?
Yeah, so strategy is super important, right? You need to kind of have a plan of action for what you're working towards. But the really cool part for me when I think about being a strategist for the organization, it's really being about being a true business partner and a holistic business partner as well. My goal is to sit down and help folks in the organization really think about how can they make an impact in ensuring our organization is as inclusive as possible. And understanding that the work that we do does stretch outside of just people's strategies. It can flow into your marketing and products and product services. It can flow into your vendors, right? Supply chain and supplier diversity. It can flow into pretty much every aspect, right? Especially if you want to be a successful organization. So as a strategist, I help our organization sit down and think about what are we doing holistically? How is it going to impact each functional area? And to be a business partner, I have to understand the organization's strategy as well and making sure there's alignment with the organization's goals as goals too there.
Well, thanks, ladies. Let's start to take a little bit of that deeper dive I talked about earlier. One of the greatest challenges with not only recruiting, but meaningful diversity discussions is clearly terminology. So can you help our audience level set some of the key definitions that should be part of their lexicon? I know, Misty, when we first met, you referred to this as giving leaders permission to speak in a word set that facilitates what they're solving for. Can you bring some of this important context forward for our group?
Yes, absolutely. So I think the anecdote that I shared is an experience or a conversation I was having with our CEO. And we were talking about workforce transformation and returning to office. And I said, yeah, we're returning to work. And he's like, let me interrupt you because words matter. We have been working throughout the entire 18 months. So we'll be returning to an office. And so I just took that framework and, being in this space, I see things on, a ton of different platforms, and it's always diverse talent. We're hiring for diversity. And I'm starting to notice that diversity is being used as a blanket word, and there's not a lot of specificity. And I think that's problematic. And so diversity cannot be used as a synonym when you're really trying to solve for representation, specifically for Black, Latinx, Indigenous people, even people of color can make the assumption that everyone experiences the workforce the same. And I know I highlighted things that are visible. So let's talk about some of the things that are non-visible. And then the other part of that, which is intersectionality. So for some of our veterans, our parents and caregivers. So when you're having conversations, it is really, really important to name exactly the audience that you're looking to address and get really comfortable saying it. Like saying someone is white or Black or however they identify, it's not a bad thing. I think it actually shows a commitment to really address the issues at hand. And we need to invite each other to actually, make some mistakes, learn from those, and really grow and learn together on this journey. So for our conversation today, as you pop in questions, like definitely, if you have something specific that you're trying to solve for, like ask us very specifically. I think that'll help us craft like very specific answers for you.
Thanks, Misty. That's a great reminder for the team. As opposed to the chat function, please use the Q&A button if you do have questions that you'd like to submit for our panel. And with that, Kayla, as we focus on equitable hiring practices, can you tell us how non-human resources leaders can work to set goals to ensure representation for those who are not present?
Yeah, for sure. So definitely right off the bat, right, you need to kind of know where you are. So, have you taken a look at your data? Do you know the representation and the makeup of your teams? I think if you are a frontline leader, right in the ground roots of it, you probably can take a look around, right? You can see the visible identities like Misty referred to. Some of the things that you may not be aware of is maybe someone's disability status. You may not be aware of their economic status or some of the other non-visible identities. So that's where your data can really come into play if your organization is collecting that information. When it comes to maybe some of those non-visible ones, having relationships and having communication open with your teams is going to be super critical. But you really need to have a basic understanding of what the makeup is first so you know where you're starting from. Then I would recommend you take a little bit look about what your market data is, what's your talent pools looking like and your talent pipelines are looking like. It can change from geo region, right? We know that the city of Philadelphia is going to look a little bit different than the city of LA, right? The makeups and the demographics there are going to be different, and how you develop your strategy should look a little bit different. But then I ask you to take one additional layer when you're looking at your external market data as well. Think about it from an industry perspective, right? So we are in hospitality, we are in food service management. We know that there's going to be high representation of people of color in hourly roles, right? So maybe your targets and your goals may not necessarily need to focus around hourly, but then I ask you to think about, are you having that same representation in your leadership? Are those folks progressing throughout the organization? So having access to your data, then comparing and looking at like what is happening in the market, looking at the Census 2020 data, right? Because we know numbers are changing, especially with the releases of those reports that are coming out. Those are some really ground roots efforts and set a foundation for you to set some realistic and incremental goals over time. Because, if you're looking for parity right across the board of 50% folks of color or 50% women versus 50% men, right, in your organization, that may not be realistic if you're hiring, for example, you're trying to hire executive chefs, right? We know that it can be harder for women to be in those executive chef roles. So you setting yourself a lofty goal of 50% may not be honestly realistic, but then you can sit back and say, okay, well, we're going to do the work to diversify our talent pipelines and our talent pools, but then we're also going to do a little bit of community work here so that we can also ensure those pipelines are going to be diversified over time. So maybe you're going to support a local organization that's all about advancing women in culinary. Maybe you can sponsor a scholarship for a woman to advance her career and make it to those higher levels of culinary and chefism, right? Out there. So there are really cool ways, but you definitely have to understand where you're starting to know where you can go.
I love that. We're all about results. So managing to the metrics, not just with the organization, but within your department, within your peer groups, within the people you interact with. I think that's another layer that people really don't consider. So let's play off of each other a little bit. And Misty, I love when you said that people misuse the word, if I could paraphrase it that way, diversity as a synonym or an all-inclusive bucket of curing everything. So as we keep looking at diversity as a problem, not an opportunity, why are employers reluctant to hire more inclusively, ladies?
So I think if I can, kind of go back to what Kayla mentioned about the data, I think it's not understanding the current demographic composition of their organization. I think some of it is rooted in fear and getting it wrong. And I think there is a lot of centering of self and questioning kind of, well, what is going to happen to me if I start to create opportunities that bring people in who I actually am not familiar with, be it because they've attended a different school, they have a different, career background than I have. They're from a different region of the country. So I think it's reluctance to actually look at this as a business problem, set an objective and set some key results and put it in place and actually make it integral to your business process. And so this is the one area that I find really interesting because I don't think there's any other part of the business where we would accept the same results year after year and not make progress and not change how we're doing things. I also think there's an opportunity to not always try and solve things from within. If you have a deficit of talent or someone that can't really solve this problem because they lack the understanding, the education, I think this is an opportunity to outsource, leverage a company like Indeed, leverage some third-party organizations that you can bring in that can at least get you started. And so I would just say start somewhere. And I think you need to connect it to your business outcomes, business revenue, and really be mindful that the demographic landscape, specifically in the US, is definitely shifting to be more minority focused. And so the longer you delay actually hiring more inclusively, you run the risk of your business being left behind because you're not going to be able to solve problems that the market is actually asking for, for solutions. So I guess in summary, I think prioritization and really looking at this as a business problem and being innovative in your approach.
Victoria, I'd also like to toss in a little bit there to build upon what Misty said, because I totally agree there that this is going to be super important to have the clarification. Because I do agree. I think a lot of times it can be just a misunderstanding sometimes of really what we're trying to do, right? I think sometimes the comments you have is like, oh, well, we'll just hire that person just to check off the box. And that's not the goal, right? At the end of the day, the goal is not to check off the box. When you check off the box, you end up tokenizing folks at times. And that's not what we want to do. That's actually counterproductive, right? To the culture of inclusion and belonging, to make the person maybe feel a little bit ostracized and not set them up for success. So for any of my HR folks out there that may be feeling like you get some pushback from hiring managers and from hiring leaders when you try to have some of these DE&I conversations about increasing your representation and things of that nature, I encourage you to say that, the goal is to hire the right talent for the right role all the time, right? That's always bare minimum, right? That we're going to do is always hire the right talent. But your goal is to diversify the talent pipelines. How can we change up the processes to make the candidate pool itself so you have more diverse options to choose from, and they're all qualified because you want the best talent?
You both hit on some points that I know are touching our audience and certainly myself personally, it's that zero sum equation, right? And especially the three of us are women, so that if you're the only woman ascending, that there can't be another woman that you're bringing along with you, because there can only be one at the table, because there's a perception out there that people will lose out. And I love what you said, Kayla, and I wish I had that advice when I started out in this industry, because my first 10 years, I was a EEOC slash for female management Hispanic. And just because my last name and my ex-husband gives me great alliteration for who I am and my personal brand. So it's really things that people don't think about, how we internalize some of these issues. So, it brings us to one of the questions that's in our Q&A that I think is really awesome. The perception is that both of you are on the younger side of being industry professionals, and you're both in highly visible roles. Have you experienced age biases? And if so, what has your experience been in overcoming those challenges?
Yeah, I saw that question come in, and I also found it, interesting. So what I would say is, in the almost 2 decades that I've been in the workforce, it's actually something that I personally have faced in every single role. And it's interesting to me because we can't make assumptions based off of what we see. And so, absolutely, I know I have experience where people assume I'm early in career, or that I am new to role, and that my perspective will be different, but we never question the folks that are of a different generation that are also in these high impact roles. And so I think it's always a teachable opportunity, like it is today, to really kind of open up the doors for some understanding. I think it's important, and now we recognize that business is personal. Like, you're looking down the hallway in my home right now because of the environment that we've been in. And so sometimes it's level setting and really getting to know an individual, because once you actually make it comfortable for people to be curious, they can learn more and they can develop an appreciation for a perspective that you're bringing. I can't say that it's been overt and it hasn't been blatant, and I absolutely don't want to minimize the experience that our over 40 workforce population experiences, especially now with the primarily millennial and Gen Z workforce. Definitely different, and I would say that it's far less often that I experience what other folks might be experiencing in the workplace. But I appreciate the question. I'm sure, I don't know, Kayla, did you have any experience with that as well?
Yeah, it's actually something I've struggled with myself. We talk about imposter syndrome, which I've been trying to change my language around what imposter syndrome really is and what it means for us. But, sometimes being seen or perceived as the younger person, which thank you so much for seeing me as young out here in these streets. And so I can definitely say that I have had to take time to almost boost my own confidence, right? And say, I'm in the room for a reason, point blank, period. I have this title for a reason. My background and my expertise backs that up. So sometimes for myself, and just as a personal kind of anecdotal moment for myself, was just, I deserve to be here, and I have to learn how to manage up without authority at times. A lot of times in these roles as strategists or business partners or individual contributors that have a high touch, special exposure to leadership, there are moments where you need to sit back and say, I'm here for a reason. I have expertise in this space, and my voice can be heard and should be heard at times, right? You read the room, like Misty said, and kind of understand the climate and the space that you're in. But I implore, to keep that in mind around how can you show up to the space, show your credibility, show your subject matter expertise, and people will come along and along the journey with you as you work to build those relationships.
Great. Thank you, ladies. This is clearly a job seeker's market right now. Kayla, can you share a little bit on how our hospitality leaders can highlight their value proposition so that they're optimizing their candidate pools the same way that Wawa is?
For sure. The one thing that I would love to call out here, the pandemic was hard. It hit the hospitality and the food service industry immensely, right? And I don't know, we haven't fully recovered, right? We're still trying to figure it out. Not only did we have to figure out how to either lay off or furlough a lot of staff, and I say that generally speaking from society wise and us across the food service and hospitality industry, we all had to sit back and figure out what are we going to do to survive. And some of that involved like staff reductions, it involved furloughs, it involved layoffs. But then now, even as business is picking back up for us, we're finding folks are resigning, right? And they're leaving the hospitality industry. There's a lot of great studies coming out that came out this spring around hospitality and food service, restaurant management. All of those industries lost even more folks, even though they were trying to hire like crazy or hired immense amount of people, right? Why is that happening? Well, folks took some time during the pandemic to maybe pursue another career. They took some time to maybe find out if there's another industry. But what I will say as well is that, when we do have those moments where we have to do reductions in force or we have to potentially lay off some staff, it does hinder our trust between us and our associates. It can sometimes feel like they may have lost job security. This organization that they had been with for so long, then a pandemic hit and then they lost that job security, right? Then they took the time to go somewhere else. Maybe they took the time and said, the stress of this industry is really not really the best for me and my family anymore. So as a hospitality industry, as us in the food service industry, we need to sit back and really have a conversation. How are we building that trust back again? That we are truly here for our associates and here for their mental, emotional, and physical well-being, right? The pandemic said, hey, we need to make sure we are protecting our employees with face masks, with shields, making sure they're not getting COVID. Our frontline workers are right there in the midst of it. Then how are we protecting our folks emotionally and mentally as well? Are we providing them EAP services? Are we truly having a culture of inclusion, belonging, where they feel like they can bring their whole self to work? Taking the time to really show that employer value proposition of a place that we truly value our associates is going to help build that trust back, that folks want to come back into the restaurant industry and show that there's a lot of value here, and giving back to clients and customers is valuable.
Those are really empowering sentiments, Kayla, and it harkens back to a conversation that the three of us had. And Misty, you coined a different terminology for the Great Resignation. Can you bring that thought back for us?
Yeah, sure. So, full transparency, I wish I thought of this terminology. I think Indeed and some other partners came up with it, but we've reframed that to the great realization. And people have taken a step back and they said, this has been the hardest time that I've ever experienced. And no one had the playbook to figure out what was going on and what's next. And candidly, we still don't know. And so when we think about what's happening in the workforce, we've connected inclusion and belonging to workplace happiness. And what we're really identifying is that, being valued, being energized, that sense of belonging is really important for individuals right now. And so everything Kayla mentioned is top of mind for every single person. People want meaningful work. They want to have an impact at work. And people have had a lot of time to really sit back and reevaluate and reprioritize. And so it creates this interesting environment where it's really a job seeker market. And so now as employers, there is this competitive landscape for talent. The market is compressed. There's a labor shortage that you all are especially experiencing based on the exits in your industry. And so, we really think that as you all are starting to rehire and attract talent, as we mentioned earlier, that value proposition is becoming more and more critical. What will make a person not just want to come for the role that you have posted, but the organization at large. Not just what they see on your website, on your employer brand pages, but in the people that they meet. How is the message of inclusion and belonging and representation amplified, and it's genuine, and they get a real sense of how they will have, what type of experience they'll have inside of your four walls? Because effectively being on the front line and managing employees, you all are in office and in your respective retail locations.
Misty, you triggered just one additional thought for me there as you were talking. That the other part was if we're going to be here for our associates, and I think hospitality, we always talk about the customer is always right. We put them first. Can we take that same mentality? What does hospitality mean for our associates? What does it mean for our employees if we're going to take that same mindset and put our associates up at that level of that hospitality mindset? That could also be that change you need to bring that talent and feeling belonging here at your organization.
Love that.
Really making sure everybody is seen and heard. It's definitely resonating with some of the folks in our audience. One of the pieces that when we truly practice inclusion, it shifts our lens from conformity or falling in line with what we've always done in an organization's norms to convergence, where everybody's coming together with a common purpose, meeting on common ground. Misty, how can people prioritize acceptance versus simply making blanket statements of support, whether it's with recruiting or with retention?
So I think this is a really interesting framing for our discussion. And so when I think about the work of diversity, inclusion, belonging, DEI, whatever you call it at your organization, I think we're largely, disrupting how we've always looked at what our workforce should be. And so, I had a conversation earlier today, and it was about empathy and self-compassion. And so if I take the statement that Kayla made, given that you all are in hospitality and, the customer is always right, and how do you apply that to your frontline staff? I think it's showing empathy for the varied experiences that everyone is having right now. And it's not pity, it's not feeling sorry, but it's really being able to understand what their experiences are and reflecting on an experience that you have that may have shifted something for you and coming together that way. And I think it's taking action. It's a lot. You want to have a message of solidarity, so your company is actually, well received and has a positive image. But beyond the message, what's really happening? What are the actions? And so some of the things that, you can prioritize the acceptance and just the respect for those differences by setting up brave spaces or having honest conversations after we have events that are very triggering for select communities. Like if we go down the list, we can say parents and caregivers had a very traumatic experience. Those of us who identify as Black or African American with Black Lives Matter, very traumatic experience. Asian American and Pacific Islander hate. We have, that xenophobia. We have all of these isms and phobias. And so I think if you set up spaces inside of your organization to really show that you have a desire to connect and have a depth of understanding, I think that's how we move from just a statement or changing our Instagram square Black or changing our logos to colors that align with representation months. And it requires a lot of self-work. And so that self-compassion, I think I want to invite you all to give yourself permission to change your mind about how you've thought about these things in the past. Even if you have ideals that make it really difficult for you to accept diversity, inclusion, and belonging is not going away, just say, you know what, I can change my perspective. Like, I don't have to be wedded to this idea or my upbringing. I can question why I think this way, and I will be okay. And so it's always rooted in education. There's some self-discovery, and I think a lot of the reasons we cannot get to that respect and acceptance of differences is out of fear. And so I think we have to recognize that in order for all of this to really happen and be realized, we have to move beyond that. And so I think there are a ton of tools that are out there that can help everyone, moving past that fear and moving into action.
I really love that by eliminating the fear and creating those brave spaces, but also marketing that to candidates, right? That we've got these employee resource groups where you not only have peer support, but you've got leadership support that's dedicated to making sure those voices are heard. That's my takeaway from what you just said. That's really powerful. Let's think about, for those that are on the call and in our audience and who will listen to this recording in the subsequent days and weeks. For those people who truly aspire to progressive responsibility and internal promotional recruitment, why do we need to see someone that looks like us in a higher position of leadership to give ourselves permission to show up as our natural selves, ladies?
I can take this one to start. You can't be what you can't see. I think that is a very simple statement. I think it's being socialized. And I look at how I show up today is very different from how I used to show up. And so I think we all have ideals of how we need to look to be on a panel, to be in these, highly visible roles, what success is supposed to look like. I mean, technically, and I said this earlier on another call, like the dean of my business school is like rolling over in her grave at the fact that I have on these gold hoop earrings, red lipstick, and I'm not in a suit and a collar, right? And so I think all of those things, like visible, how we show up, how we talk, how we wear our hair, how we interact, some of our hobbies, all inform and give us permission to show up in our most natural form and what's really, really authentic to us. If everyone looks the same, we will never feel like we belong or that we even have an opportunity to be there. And so even if it starts with just one, I'm going to still align from our vice president. We are making sure that we might be first in these rooms, but we won't be the last. And we just need more of that to occur in order for people to actually know that things are possible. Kayla, I'm sure you have something to add.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, Misty, you set that up so nicely and cover. I totally agree. Representation is critical, not just in media, but in everyday roles, right? Like I was just talking the other day. I was watching a movie. I can't remember the name of it, but it was really nice to see individuals of the disability community. So a couple folks who had some visible disabilities in just everyday, regular roles, right? And it was super nice just to see that representation there without being centered and focused around that. So representation is critical to show that we can just be there. And the one thing I'll also add on top of what Misty already mentioned is that being the first of something is mighty lonely, right? It takes a lot of time, effort, energy, privilege, honestly, as well, to be able to say that I have the mental capacity to be the only one in the room all the time to break down those systemic barriers. So we can't always say that it's just going to be, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and it's going to be that one person's always going to be able to break down the barriers and so that they can be their authentic self. But as soon as you start to see one person being a little bit more free, you see someone sharing their story, you showing someone, like Misty said, come onto the video with gold hoop earrings, right? Honestly, this is probably the first year where I haven't thought about every single time I get on like some type of presentation of this sort, if I should straighten my hair, right? Like you guys get my curls. I mean, I love them and y'all are gonna love them too, is now the mentality I have. But that's been over time, right? It's things I've had to unlearn and condition, but because I saw leaders, I saw representation, and not even just from women, but I've seen Black men wearing natural hair too as well, which has been inspiring too. So I definitely wholeheartedly believe representation is going to be the critical answer that we need to ensure that folks continue to move up through organizations.
Well, we definitely have some great questions coming in through the Q&A that align to what you're both saying. And I think this flips in terms of a potential barrier question. What do you do when someone says, I want to hire the best people, versus truly stating that they should be focusing on building a diverse team?
So I have these conversations often. And again, I like to center everything in education. So, one, I think sometimes it is lack of awareness or just ignorance on the person's part that that statement is implying that only the best people look like who we already have. And in the majority of our organizations, if we look at leadership or even like mid-level managers, they don't look like me. They don't look like Kayla. They don't look like Victoria, right? It's usually male dominated, of a mature age. And so it's saying, well, help me understand, right? I always start from a place of curiosity. And, depending on the way the conversation goes, you kind of have to guide them to understand, okay, so that question leads me to think that you believe that you can't find talent that doesn't look like you. And so then we have a conversation of network stratification. Then we talk about resources where we can pull people in. And it's this journey of education and exposure and awareness. It doesn't change overnight. This is not something that changes fast. We've been having the same conversation for multiple years now, but I always appreciate the question because that lets me know where that person is, right? They're not afraid to admit that they still don't see it as progressive as we would like them to. And so, if that person is in a position of power, I think there's some peer influencing that can be done because there always has to be one person in the organization that is a little bit farther along on the journey. So I think, to sum it up, evaluate the relationship, see if that person is coachable and, is welcoming of the education, and then give them some resources and kind of give them some exposure to profiles that are just not at their fingertips and really invite them to think about it differently. They may not change their mind in the moment, but you continue to influence and again, use that peer network to help them see things a bit differently.
Yeah, definitely. Meeting people where they are is so critical. And that's honestly, I talked about being a business partner earlier. Honestly, I believe most of my job is just relationship management. It's about building trust with my peers, knowing so that they know that I have the best interest of them, the organization, and their function at the end of the day. Like that's my goal, is to make the team and the organization a better place to work and a culture of inclusion and belonging. And those relationships are going to be critical to helping folks have that trust within you to have the best interest at heart to move the journey along.
Thanks. As we talk about the great realization, this really flips the script and focuses less on the company. Let's talk about the candidates for a second. How has the pandemic impacted what people look for in a corporation that they want to join?
I will also say not just the pandemic has changed people's perceptions, but we are still going through, right, social unrest and a racial reckoning a little bit. I think some of the terms that are thrown out here, people are expecting a lot more from organizations. They're expecting their organizations, like I said earlier, to provide safety for them. And I say safety in the multiple ways that means, not just physical safety, but psychological safety too as well. There's a lot of studies coming out around how people of color and even women don't necessarily want to return to the office, right? They don't necessarily want to be faced with microaggressions on a daily basis. So the fact that there is a much more power from the candidate experience, us as employers do have to step up and say, are we truly meeting their needs? Are we providing these safe spaces for them, these brave spaces for them? Are we protecting them and having their best interests at heart?
Yeah, I think candidates are absolutely aware that it is a job seeker market and the ball is in their court. So with the awareness and the rise of visibility of environmental, social, and governance. I think this, the workforce now, they're asking very specific questions about what is the impact your company is having on communities where you operate, society as a whole, and they are really bold and very specific. So if your website is only presenting, a leadership team that doesn't have visible representation, they are asking very specifically, what are some of your aspirational goals? What are your succession plans? Is there really space for me? And to Kayla's point, is this a safe environment for me to work? Because you immediately recognize that you're going to be bringing a different perspective a large majority of the time based on your background. And is that going to be accepted in the environment that you're joining, or is it going to be met with, some resistance? And I think they are really looking to connect it to like that belonging piece as well as social impact.
I know you've both talked about a lot of best practices, but are there any sample roadmaps to success to highlight processes or recruiting tool sets to help not only diversify an organization, but evolve a company's culture?
There's a few good models out there that I would recommend. I believe Towers like Watson has a really good one. When you talk about diversity, equity, inclusion on a maturity model, that might be a really great space or place for you to start, is to take a look at your organization. Where are you on that maturity model? And then those usually gives you a couple steps within there that you can then look and see, how do I get to that next level and what do I may need to think about and do?
If somebody in our audience wants to self-educate themselves, we started off with little tidbits about both of you, but what are some of your favorite resources, whether they're books, podcasts, other speakers that you could share with our audience?
So a couple of resources that I love that we use at Indeed. So catalyst.org is a great resource for education. Crescendo is a company that is a plugin in Slack. I think it's also standalone where you can curate your learning experience. There is a newsletter that gets pushed out and it's a ton of different content. It's called The Filament. And I think those are three resources that I absolutely enjoy. I happen to work for a seasoned D&I leader who has transitioned into environmental, social, and governance. So if you Google LaFawn Davis, I think that's a great learning experience with the amount of content that you can just find on her. Another D&I leader that I absolutely enjoy is Verne Myers at Netflix. And she also has a book that is available. Indeed also has podcasts. And if you go to Lead with Indeed, there are a ton of resources there for you as well.
So on my side, I have podcasts. So just recently started about a 45-minute commute back to the office, which is I dreaded, but I was excited because now I start my podcast back up. So if y'all are big followers of NPR, Code Switch is always a really, really good one that just kind of keeps you up to date. Has some really good conversations. If you had some talks around Hispanic Heritage Month and understanding the term Hispanic, they just dropped one that was really good at the end of September that talked about that conversation, that language. Just a couple other good ones from NPR just in general to keep up with the news. But then on another note that may not necessarily be like super factual, but I love to read books and sci-fi and fantasy just in general and fiction. And so seek out authors that identify in these communities. And it doesn't always have to be a nonfiction. It does not have to be a diversity, equity, and inclusion 101 book. You can still learn a lot about people and culture, even from historical fiction books, just by seeing characters from different communities shown in lights of power can really change how you look at it. And ooh, Misty just dropped a book in there. I'm gonna have to save that one for myself. But like, Children of Blood and Stone, like if you're big into fantasy, yeah, right. There's so many great authors coming out, and it brings in like folklore, right? African folklore, which I never had been exposed to. So little things like that can go a new way for you.
Really quick, there's something new that just dropped on YouTube. It dropped 2 days ago, I think, when we all could not connect to Instagram and Facebook. So it's a series and it just talks about like the Black creative space and the influencers. And naturally, you know, we're Black women talking on this panel, so we can't separate from the lived experiences that we have, but it doesn't detract from experiences of other underrepresented groups and the intersections of our identities. So I definitely would start there as well, because it's a lot of interesting content that weaves together different cultural experiences.
That's a great one. I'm writing that one down now.
Well, ladies, our dialogue today has certainly generated a buzz, and just really, really excited about how quick our time has gone and this informative discussion. You know, you're clearly stating that this is a now or never moment for corporations to get on board, to be able to move forward and to get out of the theoretical and into the activation mode if they want to have long-term success. You know, I think successfully serving and employing diverse populations certainly doesn't happen by accident. It's hard work, and I'm glad that we have your tutelage to provide some guidance today. It takes introspection to create great organizations where everyone feels they not only have a voice, but they're seen and valued for their contributions. So thank you for such an insightful session today. Misty and Kayla, your imparting wisdom to inspire our hospitality leaders is outstanding. And I think we're excited as we start to bring forward our 6th session on conversations that matter from the Diversity and Inclusion Council, which will be focused on more of the how behind how you can all take a role, and that's about building allyship. So look forward to that session as that moves forward. Again, ladies, thank you so much for your time and experience. And let's send this back to Rob for some closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for moderating this conversation. I also want to extend a big SHFM thank you to Kayla and Misty for taking the time to share fascinating insights with this SHFM family. It's been very educational. I've taken a lot of notes. And although I work for a company that has a very strong DE&I culture, it was a reminder that, you know, I have a big role to play in making sure that that continues. And so I just thank you for kind of opening up my eyes to a lot of different things today. This has been fantastic. As I mentioned earlier, there will be a 60-second evaluation that will come out at the conclusion of the session, or it'll be available as soon as you exit out of the Zoom session. Please share your thoughts, again, as we plan for upcoming SHFM events. This is very helpful for us. And before we sign off, I wanted to remind everybody about the virtual SHFM Town Hall installment on Tuesday, October 26th. Be sure to register if you have not already done so. And additionally, I'm excited to share that the SHFM National Conference, which is taking place December 6th through the 8th at beautiful Amelia Island Resort in Florida, is underway. So register for that, book your hotel room now, and we look forward to seeing you all in person in the coming months. Thank you so much for joining us today. Be well.